Hola, thrill seekers. Good morning, it's Brad. And today I thought I would try to say a little bit more about something that I said, I think it was last week, when I did that video called Brain in a Jar is Buddhism Solipsism. I brought this topic up. And the topic is the two words that are used in Dogen's Shobogenzo and a lot of other Dogen writings, but we're going to talk about Shobogenzo today, for self. And this kind of gets confusing. So there are two words that Dogen uses that are both translatable as self when you translate them into English. They are jiko and ware. And the word ware can often be pronounced waga. So let me give you some kind of sense, at least from my badly remembered years of speaking Japanese. Jiko is a very standard word meaning self. And it just basically means the same kind of self when it's in common parlance between just ordinary Japanese people. It means the same thing as the word self usually does in English. It doesn't have a lot of mystical connotations, although Dogen will give it some. The word ware, or alternately pronounced waga, is almost like me, but in grammatical usage, it can also be used. Let's see, me is a pronoun, right? But ware can also be a noun, which me is not usually a noun because it's a pronoun, right? So, am I getting my grammar terms right? But I think you know what I mean. So, the word ware is not used so much in Japanese these days to mean I. The most common way you'll hear the word ware used in contemporary Japanese is ware ware, which means we. And the one sort of phrase that annoys a lot of foreign people where this comes up is ware ware nihonjin, which means we Japanese. And it's often followed by some statement about how ware ware nihonjin, we Japanese, are superior to you guys. So a lot of foreigners will write things I've seen who are living over in Japan criticizing this use of the phrase ware ware nihonjin. But anyway, it's we or I or me, and it has more of a feeling like the English I or me than self. So jiko feels more like the word self. Ware feels a little bit more like the word I or me, but it can be used as a noun the way the word self is used and not just as a pronoun. So that's what I want to get clear. Now, as I said, in common parlance, jiko just means self, myself, me, myself, and I, that kind of thing. But when Dogen uses jiko, he is generally tending to refer to something much bigger than the individual self. So he uses it... it's a dirty word to say among Buddhists, but he uses it almost the way the word Atman is used by the Advaita Vedanta Hindu people. Now, I know that Buddhism has the theory of anatman, no self, but when Buddhism talks about no self, what they're usually talking about is no ware self, no ego self, no me self, but they are allowing for this sort of bigger self, and I'll give you some examples of contemporary Buddhists who use it, and Dogen definitely used this word. So I'll give you the most famous example first. This is from Genjo Koan, and this is Nishijima Roshi's translation, although I'm going to quibble with his translation a little bit, but let's go. To learn the Buddhist truth is to learn ourselves. Now, my quibble is that a lot of other translations say to study the Buddhist truth is to study the self. And I actually think that's a better translation because the word that comes up here is jiko. So it's not my jiko, our self. It's just jiko, to study self. To learn the Buddhist truth is to learn self, is to study self. To learn ourselves is to forget ourselves. Again, both times, jiko. To forget ourselves, jiko, is to be experienced by the myriad dharmas. To be experienced by the myriad dharmas is to let our own, and again, jiko is used there, is to let the body and mind of jiko and the body and mind of the external world, which is tako, which is other, literally other self. So to let the body and mind of self and the body and mind of other fall away. So as Nishijima Roshi translated it, to be experienced by the myriad dharmas is to let our own body and mind and the body and mind of the external world fall away. And then it ends with, there is a state in which the traces of realization are forgotten, and it manifests the traces of forgotten realization for a long time. That one doesn't have jiko in it, but I just thought I better finish the phrase. Now here is a little section that comes up also in Genjo Koan, in which ware is used, and then right after jiko is used. So here we go. When all dharmas are seen as the Buddha dharmas, then there is delusion and realization, there is practice, there is life, and there is death, there are Buddhas, and there are ordinary beings. When the myriad dharmas are each not of the self, and that time he's saying not jiko but ware, so me, the me self, the ego self. When the myriad dharmas are each not of the self, there is no delusion and no realization, no Buddhas and no ordinary beings, no life and no death. The Buddha's truth is originally transcendent over abundance and scarcity, and so there is life and death, there is delusion and realization, there are beings and Buddhas, and though it is like this, it is only that flowers while loved fall and weeds while hated flourish. I thought I'd better give you the whole quote instead of just pulling that line out so you get it, but that's where he uses ware. Now, the line that follows this uses jiko. Driving ourselves, or driving the jiko, driving the self, jiko is used here. Driving ourselves to practice and experience the myriad dharmas is delusion. When the myriad dharmas actively practice and experience ourselves, that's again jiko, that is the state of realization. Also, in Soviet Russia, we don't experience the myriad dharmas experience us. Here is another one from Genjo Koan, which uses jiko. When Buddhas are really Buddhas, they do not need to recognize themselves, and in that case it is jiko, so they don't need to recognize the self, if you want to say it that way, as Buddhas. So when Buddhas are really Buddhas, they do not need to recognize the jiko, the self, as Buddhas. Nevertheless, they are Buddhas in the state of experience, and they go on experiencing the state of Buddha. That's typical Dogen wordplay there. Okay, here's another interesting usage that I just brought out because I think it's interesting, but I'm not going to try to explain it because I'm not sure I quite get it, but I'm just going to give it to you guys. Maybe one of you will understand it. Do not assume that what is attained will inevitably become self-conscious and be recognized by the intellect. Now, I love that in English, and I think that is pretty easy to understand. Don't expect that your enlightenment will be recognized by you, by your intellect as an object. But the phrase that Nishijima and Cross translate as self-conscious is jiko no chiken. I pronounced it wrong when I first did the video, so I had to put this little insert. Sorry, back to me. So it says, do not assume that what is attained will inevitably become jiko, seen by the jiko, and then recognized by the intellect. That's what he says. So we'll leave that as that. And here's another longish quote in which the word ware comes right at the very end. So let's go and read it. When a man is sailing in a boat and he moves his eyes to the shore, he misapprehends that the shore is moving. If he keeps his eyes fixed on the boat, he knows that it is the boat that is moving forward. Similarly, when we try to understand the myriad dharmas on the basis of confused assumptions about body and mind, we misapprehend that our own mind or our own essence may be permanent. If we become familiar with action and come back to this concrete place, the truth is evident that the myriad dharmas are not self, and that self is ware. And I stopped this video to look this up. What's interesting, and pardon my eyeline while I go and read this thing off the screen, what's interesting to me is that this phrase he's translated as our own mind and our own essence may be permanent. That is, jiko doesn't appear in there, but it's jishin, which is own mind, and jisei, own essence. So there you go. It's not jiko or the other one, but it's a different one. Here is one from Buddha Nature, Busho, which I've been talking about on my podcast. By the way, I have a podcast up, and I've done 2 brand new, all new episodes of the podcast in which I am talking about this fascicle, I hate the fascicle, essay by Dogen called Busho, Buddha Nature. So go listen to the podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. I can listen to it on Spotify. It's probably on all the other ones. I don't know what they are. You kids know. You know that. You know the podcast. I don't know the podcast. Never listened to a podcast. Anyway, hearing the word Buddha nature, many students have misunderstood it to be like the self, and in this case, ware, described by the non-Buddhist Seneca. So this ware, in this case, is kind of an eternal soul kind of self. This is because they do not meet people, they do not meet themselves. In that case, it's jiko, they do not meet the self, and they do not meet with a teacher. And I got asked a question about this the last time I lectured on it a couple of days ago. And to explain this little phrase, they do not meet people, they do not meet themselves, they do not meet with a teacher, I think it's describing sort of 3 levels of self. So they are, do not meet people could also mean they do not meet a person. They do not understand what personhood really is. The next one, they do not meet self. They don't understand self, which is this big self. And they do not meet with a teacher, which is interesting because the teacher is also an aspect of self. If we think about it in Buddhist terms, when you meet a teacher, you're actually meeting an aspect of yourself that has a kind of wisdom that this aspect, this me, ware aspect, doesn't have. So that's an interesting one. This is also from Busho. Nagarjuna said, if you want to realize Buddha nature, get rid of your selfish pride. And there is an interesting footnote that appears in the Japanese. Nishijima did a translation into contemporary Japanese before he did a translation into English. And this footnote appears in the contemporary Japanese translation, I guess you'd call it, something like a translation, but does not appear in the English. And so I made a clumsy translation of the footnote, and here's my footnote. Selfish pride is a translation of the word gaman. In contemporary Japanese, this means endurance or patience. I think I talked about this last time, so, bear with me. It consists of 2 characters, ware, that's the first one, also pronounced ga, meaning self or ego, me self, and man, meaning pride. In older usage, it meant selfish pride. Gaman was a way of translating the Sanskrit word atmamana, meaning regarding oneself as, whatever you regard yourself as learned, as smart, as stupid, as whatever. So gaman in this case means the idea that at the center of the self, that's jiko is the word that Nishijima Roshi uses in that part of the footnote, there is an ego-based individual self, and he uses the word ware, and taking pride in that ware self, that ego-based individual self. So in this footnote, he actually makes a distinction between the 2. Here is another one I like. This is from Kankin, Reading Sutras. This is another part of Shobo Genzo. The practice and experience of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, which is complete perfect enlightenment, sometimes relies on good counselors and sometimes relies on the sutras. Good counselors means Buddhist ancestors who are totally themselves, and totally themselves means Zenjiko, or is Zenjiko, all self, who are all self in the bigger sense, the wider, bigger sense of self. Because the self is totally a Buddhist ancestor, and because the self is totally a sutra, it is like this. And in that case, he's using jiko when he says the self is totally a sutra. Okay? And then this is my favorite line, because this is where you get the distinction between jiko and ware. Even though we call it self, it is not restricted by you and me. And in that case, he's saying, even though we call it jiko, it is not restricted by nanji, which is a 2-character combination which uses that waga or ware self and another word that is often pronounced ore, me. Ore and ware seem like, I assume that's a mutation of the word, and ore is kind of a rude thing to call yourself, but it means me. So he makes the distinction, we call it self jiko, but it's not restricted by ware. It's not restricted by this ego self. And the last thing I want to present to you is this little expression. This is from an article by Tom Wright, who was a student of Kosho Uchiyama Roshi, who was a student of Kodo Sawaki Roshi, and he's writing about Kodo Sawaki Roshi. And he's using the Japanese name order. So he says, Sawaki Kodo Roshi expressed through his enigmatic expression, jiko nga jiko o jiko suru. Self selfs the self. So that jiko nga jiko o jiko suru. Self selfs the self. So the subject, object, and the verb are all self. His disciple Uchiyama Kosho Roshi expressed this as jiko giri no jiko. So jiko giri no jiko means self that is only self. The giri means like limit, self that is limited by self, but again this is jiko self. In other words, who we truly are, who our true self is a self that is connected to and comprises the whole universe. This is embodied in the Buddhist understanding of interdependence of all things. So there you go. I don't know if I managed to explain the difference between jiko self and ware self, but again, jiko is more commonly translated as the self, but Dogen uses it in a bigger sense, the self that comprises the whole universe, if we take Tom Wright's word. And ware is more like me, I. And I assume that the word ore comes from ware. Ore is a more common thing for Japanese people to use, just to say me. And watashi is probably also derived from ware, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go look all this up, but it's just my assumption. But they have the feeling when you read them as me. So what is this me that I'm worried about? I think is what Ramesh Balsekar said. And I talked about that in another video, so I won't talk about that now. Anyway, that's I just thought that was interesting, and maybe it would be interesting to some of you. I don't know. We'll see. Let's see what happens. Anyway, if you want to support me doing more research into linguistic Buddhism, you can send a donation to the Patreon and PayPal links that you will find at hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen. Would it be over here? hardcorezen.info/donate. I don't know if I'm really pointing at it because I haven't put the title up on the screen yet. Anyway. Send it to hardcorezen.info. or you don't send anything to there. You just go there and you find my Patreon and PayPal links. That is my only way of making a living these days. I'm going to Europe in, a week and a half or so, and I don't know if I'll earn any money on this European jaunt because I'm spending a heck of a lot to get out there. But so basically the only money I'm making is from your donations. I'll try to keep putting videos up when I'm in Europe. We'll see if that's possible, but probably it'll be possible. Anyway, we will see you later. Have a good time all the time. Oh, by the way, you don't have to donate if you don't want to. That's what I forgot to say. Just take it for free. Anyway, have a good time all the time. We will see you later. Bizzles. Ziggy, what are you woofing at? Ziggy, what are you woofing at? What are you woofing at? Hey Ziggy, what are you woofing at? Oh, there's a dog up there woofing at you, and you gotta woof back. Okay. We'll see you later, Ziggy.